This is Ace from Delta 2 Alpha, and welcome to the Monks and Mavericks podcast. This episode of Monks and Mavericks podcast has been brought to you by Impower supplements. You can find them online at impower.life. They produce AminoPro, the world's most bioavailable source of protein. It's halal, kosher, nut-free, dairy-free, gluten-free, and vegan-friendly. But more importantly, you can feel your life, workouts, and recovery with AminoPro and waffles. Use our code D2A10 and receive 10% off.
Hey, brother, man, how you doing?
Doing great. Kim, why don't you just introduce yourself, because you're going to do a little bit better telling people who you are versus me, because you know more about you than me, I hope.
I'm just a geek, man. A geek that likes to learn about neuroscience and nutrition and movement and all those kind of gunfighting, hand-to-hand stuff. It's kind of some of the stuff you're into. It's how we actually got turned on to each other. And yeah, kind of a jack of all trades, maybe master of nothing, but really interested in kind of helping people recover, because most athletes have had some level of injury or multiple injuries, and kind of working around that kind of stuff, struggle to some degree with their nutrition and recovery and health. So yeah, that's always been a part of my life as far back as I can remember. So yeah.
So what is your take on the whole side of performance? Where do you hang your head?
In what terms?
So do you, right? We're living in a day in which people want their answers fast, and they want them absolute. So I mean, are you over there eating 2 pounds of beef a day, nothing more, maybe a little bit of salt and some water, black coffee? Are you going through in a raw food vegan? You know, like seeing what happens when a person eats nothing but bananas for 3 months?
Yeah. Well, those are all great examples right up there with the guy who was on a Twinkie diet for a month, the guy that did, not the Super Size Me, but the guy who did McDonald's for a month. The Twinkie guy and the McDonald's guy both picked a calorie number that was below their BMI and had their blood work taken before and their blood work taken after, and just eating Twinkies, 1,800 calories worth of Twinkies a day for 30 days, all the guys' blood markers improved. Same thing with the guy who did McDonald's for 30 days, but was on, I think it was 2,200 or 1,800 calories a day. So what does that tell us? That basically any diet will work to a degree, and humans are incredibly flexible. But I would say that surviving even for a period of time is not the same thing as thriving. And I wish I could have a word with people like Joe Rogan, who, you know, have a great ability to reach a lot of people. They I don't think they've stopped to ask themselves why they feel great on a certain diet. They assume that because they feel great, that it is great for them. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean, and I've had plenty of conversations with people who like to tout the benefits of ketogenic and stuff like that. But we'll give you a little more time to spitball on that before I go through and inject my opinions too eagerly.
Well, so like those people and Joe, who's an incredible athlete, I thought if I feel good and I have high energy levels, that must mean that whatever I'm doing was good for me, right? Seems an easy path to fall down, and or easy trap to fall into. And my test, at the time I was living in Syria, and I was working for an oil company, and I was doing kind of CrossFit style workouts, and had a really high stress life, and I was doing intermittent fasting, and I was so keto that 98% dark chocolate was sweet to me, like had a sweetness to it. So I was really strict, and I didn't understand at the time the science around what happens, what gluconeogenesis means. I mean, that's the creation of sugar, new sugar from other compounds like fats and proteins. And I didn't understand that cortisol and adrenaline are needed to do that. And hence, if you've ever heard of the term cortisol belly, you know how some people respond to elevated levels of cortisol for long periods of time. So my litmus test if I was, how long my fast should last was based on, can I pick 500 pounds up off the floor for reps, and do I feel good doing it? Because obviously when you're fasting and you're keto, your endurance tends to suffer unless you're, like, especially during a fast. So I wasn't going to be testing myself doing any running. And so the deadlift was a good one for me. And I had a deadlift platform in my apartment to the detriment of my neighbors.
Well, it's a concrete building probably over there in Syria at the time. So
yeah, a few times I had them knocking on my door because of the music or the heavy bag or the deadlift. So you can imagine, and they're so polite. So back to the story. Go ahead.
I guess nobody can really see Kev. Kev is about 6'3", and at the time, would you have been 220 pounds?
No, 6'1" on a good day. And about
I'm trying to talk you up here, bro. Okay, like no one can see you. You'd be like 8 feet tall if you want to.
Yeah, no. 6'1", and at the time I was probably 255 at about 14% body fat, somewhere around there.
Yeah, so substantially larger than the average Syrian.
Absolutely, yeah, and So to kind of wrap this little thing up in a neat little box, because I felt good and because I thought that's a marker for continuing to do what I should do, I eventually worked my way up to 5 days on water, just water, or dark coffee or black coffee, and doing deadlifts every day just to test to see how long that fast should go on. And that was my litmus test. And that went on for 4.5 years or something like that. I did different, playing around with different levels of that, and being keto the vast majority of that time. And it wasn't until I had just left Syria that I cratered my metabolism. And it works. Something like the carnivore diet or something like keto or intermittent fasting, these things increase stress levels in general. And you have to look at it as a set of balance scales, or at least that's a way of looking at it, as a set of balance scales. If you put too much stress on one side and you tip the scales, it's no longer, good stress. You can handle a certain amount of stress, and the better fueled you are, the more sleep you get, the more stress that you can handle. Obviously, the lack of sleep, working shifts like night shift to day shift and doing lots of switches like you do, that's a stress. Fighting with your girlfriend or your wife or your kids is a stress. Under eating is a stress. The wrong foods are a stress. Foods that you're allergic to are a stress, or things that you're sensitive to are a stress. And the list just goes on. Almost anything can be a stress if it's too much or too little of it. Not enough of certain vitamins or minerals also causes stress, or bottlenecks in the pathways to create things. For example, testosterone. The bottleneck for testosterone is vitamin A, but tell me how many people are taking at least 6 ounces of liver a week, or a good vitamin A supplement. And I'm not talking about a multivitamin. I don't want to get sidetracked trying to explain that one. So with that picture in mind, going back to the stress, I was ramping up my stress not only at work, but having fasts that were 5 days long, lifting heavy weights. And then when I would go off my fast, I'm eating a lot of meat, which I don't have a problem with, a lot of fat, again, not a problem with, but both protein and fats need to be converted into glucose, because what people don't understand is that every cell in your body preferentially runs on glucose. That means it prefers to run on glucose. It's the most efficient way for the cell to run. And if you want it to run efficient, that's why it doesn't take a lot of energy to turn that 4 calories, or get that 4 calories out of that gram of carbohydrate. Whereas converting protein into glucose takes a little more energy, and fat into glucose takes a little more energy. And it requires the key 2 hormones we already discussed, or touched on briefly, which is adrenaline and cortisol. So both of those create a high stress environment. And I liken that to living in Disneyland. Like, you want to visit Disneyland or a strip club. You don't really want to live in the strip club. That's gonna get old in a hurry, and it's gonna have consequences. So, and that it just took, the more healthy you are when you go into something like that, the longer you can ride that train until the wheels fall off. And that's what happened with me. And when it did, I was in so much pain for such a long period of time that there were days, and I have a few firearms where I was like, man, I'm gonna put that 40 caliber Smith & Wesson in my mouth, start fucking pulling the trigger, because it's just I couldn't do anything to put a dent in it. I tried huge doses of ibuprofen. I didn't try any like narcotics, but I tried a lot of painkillers, and just nothing would work, man. It takes a long time to heal a broken metabolism. It probably took me as many years of fucking it up, so probably 5 years, to get most of it healed. I don't know that I'm 100% there yet, but I'm pretty close.
You'd mentioned liver as a source of vitamin A, as well as some other supplements. If somebody, as an example, just didn't care for the taste of liver, or had to be on the move a fair amount, what would a good source of vitamin A be as far as in supplement form? Can you recommend one?
Yeah, I mean, the supplement that I use is the guy that I have nothing to do with his, full disclosure, I have nothing to do with this guy's business. I buy his products. I get no kickback in any way, shape, or form. The website is Idea Labs. I think it's idealabsdc.com. And he has another one called idealabsdc.com/lab. Research chemicals, so to speak. He has a product called Retinil, which is a liquid form of vitamin A that is a small enough bottle that you can pack an easy month or two supply with you, no matter where you're going, and it will meet your needs. It's a great product. The guy makes some exceptional stuff. Highly recommend him.
And so, as far as making that into a fully actionable step for the average male who would be looking to unlock that testosterone production pathway or optimize it, they'd be looking at 10,000 milligrams per 10 kilos, or where should they be? Because there's a level of toxicity that exists in some of these things. Vitamin A, I believe, being one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So in nature, you never find vitamin A by itself. It always comes with vitamin D. The safe ratio is 10 IUs of vitamin A to every IU of vitamin D. And with that ratio, you can go up to 250,000 IUs a day, which I've done for months on end at times, and then drop down to 100,000 over time. And then now I basically eat liver once a week and occasionally supplement with, occasionally I'll supplement now with his product, especially when I'm traveling, because I usually can't get liver no matter what where I'm traveling, because it normally doesn't get cooked. So that's what I would recommend to people is experiment with it. If you're having things like skin acne issues, which often happens when vitamin A is low, if you're having that kind of lagging energy feeling, it could very likely be related to vitamin A and vitamin D deficiency, or not deficiency, but not non-optimal levels, let's say. And you can go and get testing done, but people have to understand that testing is really, it's not as clear cut as people like to make it out to be. Let me give you an example using testosterone. So I've experimented with HRT, so hormone replacement, for various pituitary related reasons. And I wanted to get off of the HRT using injectables that the doctor had me on. And I had read about creams and some different oral preparations that you could try. And when I switched to the cream, I was able to, in the testing, maintain numbers that looked good. But in reality, I felt like crap. So the testing is limited. Here, let me give you another example. Iron levels. So you go and get your ferritin tested, which is typically the marker that they use for iron. But if you test ferritin in the blood, how do you know? Because they're assuming, I'm going to tell you that right now, they're assuming that the ferritin levels are equal in the tissues. Well, what if your liver is holding most of the iron? Or what if the iron is, equally stored in most of your muscles? How do you know because I know lots of people that continually get pegged with anemia diagnosis, and yet real anemia seems to be quite rare. And if you give somebody an iron supplement, you're actually going to get them to increase red blood cell production, which is going to make them feel better. But that's part of the body's process to use up the iron, because iron overload in men, especially over the age of 40 or 45, starts to become an issue, and you want to be thinking about donating blood. It's probably one of the reasons why I've been going so gray in the last little while. That help?
Bump that copper up, bro. Bump that copper up.
I gotta try. Like I was telling you before we started this, I gotta go and try the long-term seafood consumption, like really good quality oysters or something, because I tried with various supplements and it didn't seem to put a dent in it. But so I'll have to go back and do an experiment on that.
Fair enough. One of the things that I'd just like to throw out there is neither Kevin nor myself are certified nutritionists, and every single thing that we discuss are things that we have come to based on our own research and experience. And you should not try anything that we would recommend hypothetically to each other unless you've contacted your healthcare professional. Because again, we are making statements that are based on our own experience and not ones that are certified by whatever lobbying body might govern that. I just need to throw that out there.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, we are the kind of people that like to test stuff on ourselves, and that's an N1 kind of thing. So, certainly not a double-blind study, and people should be aware of that. There's limitations. It's anecdotal or personal experience, and having read a lot of research, that still doesn't make it, something that you should hang your hat on. It's our personal experience.
Exactly. I just want to play back to, we were talking earlier about somebody, about two instances, one gentleman who did nothing but eat Twinkies, and the other gentleman that done nothing but eat, insert favorite fast food joint here. And that you had said that their markers stayed in line simply by keeping the calories in line. Is that accurate?
Their markers actually improved. All of their cholesterol, their HbA1c, which is a marker of glucose metabolism. I mean, their liver enzymes, every marker that was initially tested before and these people were, you would consider them overweight, not grossly overweight, but you'd consider them overweight. And they said, okay, we're going to prove something here. And basically, what you have to understand, this is what I believe happens with most vegetarians. Vegetarians are usually, before they start, they're unhealthy, doing whatever lifestyle they've been using, probably a lot of fast foods and bad choices and not understanding much about nutrition. And then somebody turns them on to the evangelical view of insert your favorite diet here. I was just picking on veganism, although I was a vegan for a year, I was vegetarian.
That explains a lot.
2 years. Anyways, insert whichever you want, carnivore, whatever, right? And people think, well, I get a positive. I went on this diet, which my friend recommended and saved him from cancer or whatever, and I lost all this weight and I feel better. I've got lots of energy and blah blah blah. I'm sleeping better. Well, that's probably true for a while, even years, even a decade. Who knows? Because if you were overweight enough, fat stores tons of fat soluble vitamins and minerals, right? So if you then start losing weight, these guys that were eating shit food, basically they were not getting high nutrition. They were getting the calorie level that they chose, 1,800 calories or 2,200 calories or whatever it was. And they were under eating for their BMI, their basal metabolic requirements, or BMR, and any other part of their requirement in their nutrition that wasn't being met by the food was being pulled out of their fat stores. And so, of course, with a calorie deficit, they lost weight and all their markers got better because overall it was better than what they were doing. And so now you think, apply this to carnivore, apply this to, although I'm going to touch on carnivore specifically, and I'm not saying I'm an expert in it, but I'll touch on it. It actually is the same thing as veganism in the sense that when you have whatever macronutrient you're trying to get lots of because you think that's the way to go, your body needs other stuff. So if you're a high fat, high protein guy, your brain needs glucose. Hemoglobin only runs on glucose. And so here's the kicker. This one got me because before I read this, I was like, So if you're keto and you go in and get the typical blood sugar test, the blood glucose level test, they give you I think it's 100 grams of dextrose in solution, and then they measure your response, how fast the insulin picks it up and puts it away. Well, follow this. So you aren't getting a lot of glucose. Typical keto guys, 50 grams or less of carbohydrates a day. So that puts you into ketosis. To create ketones requires, again, cortisol and adrenaline. So that's stress. Now, your body says, hey, we don't have enough glucose, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shut down the receptors for one system after the other so that these muscles and those muscles and these tissues and these other tissues will no longer be able to receive insulin. So now if you do it long enough, like I did, the vast majority of your system is insulin insensitive. What are the things we're trying to fix all the time, and what they're trying to do with metformin and all these other drugs that are for pre-diabetics? They're trying to make them insulin sensitive. They're trying to go on a fast to make them insulin sensitive, right? Or work out to create insulin sensitivity. But what you're doing by being on a keto diet or carnivore diet or any low carbohydrate diet is you're creating a situation where your body says, okay, I'm going to make these tissues insulin insensitive so that the little bit of sugar that I get when I'm not creating ketones or whatever will be there to run the hemoglobin and maybe my brain, which uses 20 or 30% of your total caloric intake any day, and keep you clear-headed. Because what happens when most people try to go keto for the first 2 weeks? They got that brain fog, that horrible brain fog, because their brain hasn't.
Well, like you wind up talking about the keto flu or the carnivore flu and stuff like that, where your body is completely just doesn't have fuel, and it's trying to get into that zone.
Let me touch on that real briefly. So think of it as a scale. On one end of the scale, you're really good at burning fat. On the other end of the scale, you are really good at burning glucose. You can't be good at both. You can be okay at both, or you can be really good at one, or anywhere else on that scale, but you can't be good at both. And so there are people out there like Dr. Mike T. Nelson. He has a program called MetFlex, I think, metabolic flexibility, that he teaches. There are other people that believe in going up and down on that scale, like spending some time everywhere. I believe you and I had a conversation around that because, for example, if you get kidnapped or you're out on a trip somewhere backpacking and you may not have access to food or whatever, you want to be able to go periods of time and be used to it mentally and physically have the enzymes or the resources to be able to survive, let's say, on a higher fat diet. Like think somebody like, special forces or something has to get deployed far behind enemy lines, maybe getting resupplied is not that easy. What's the calorie dense food? Fat, right? So a high fat, high protein diet would probably be easier to pack sufficient calories for a long ruck, as opposed to trying to pack a whole bunch of carbohydrates, and bearing in mind that every ounce of glycogen, which is what you create when you're storing glucose in muscles and in your gas tank, which is your liver, requires 3 ounces of water. So again, long deployments without easy resupply. If you're eating a carbohydrate-rich diet, you're going to need a lot of water, more water than you would need otherwise, and a lot of carbohydrate by volume. So it's probably not that optimal to be on that kind of a diet when you're in those kind of unusual circumstances. I would argue that that's not a healthy way to live. Again, you want to visit it like you visit Disneyland.
One of the it's an interesting point you're bringing up. One of the things that I had just recently posted of in kind of the last in the last few months is people were talking about rationing food and building an igloo, finger quotes and such, and you go through and you look at a lot of what people were rationing, and one of the things that there was plenty of was peanut butter. Yep. And from what I can tell, peanut butter seems to be one of the most calorically dense foods that are out there, as well as not requiring refrigeration. It's cheap. 2 kilos of 2 kilo jar of peanut butter would sustain the average male for like if we're looking at pure calories, will sustain the average male for about 2 or 3 days. The average female for up to 5.
Yeah,
and so when we go through start looking at that, well, that's really useful, and it doesn't, right? Carbohydrates carbohydrates, if they get damp, are more likely to kind of go rancid, and you start winding up getting various molds and stuff like that seem to live off them. So there is a huge advantage to going through and being able to just live off that high fat, high protein diet, but for periods of time.
Agreed. It's peanut butter. The way it is put out is really high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are metabolically suppressive. Again, that's useful in a survival situation because you don't want a really fast metabolism when calories are sparse, right? Or sparse. So that would be useful. But I would argue that if you need to be on the move, and assuming you can get water, I would go with powdered peanut butter because you could carry a lot more volume of it. The issue would be that to get the powdered peanut butter, you end up with a lower fat content, which is the high calorie part. So you'd probably have to backstop that a little bit with something like coconut oil to carry with you or something like that. But yes, peanut butter is great and it's cheap that way. And you may want the metabolic suppression considering the circumstances. Although long term that has significant consequences.
Yeah. Getting back to the conversation you and I had years ago, everything will work for a period of time.
Absolutely.
And some of the conversations I've had with people about diet and stuff like that is something to the effect of, like, I have guys, oh yeah, we're like I'm carnivore, I'm keto, and I'm this, and I said, okay, but what, like why? I'm like, well, I feel good. I'm like, okay, but do you understand what's going on? And for me, I'm interested in your take on this. Is my belief is that ketones are a stress hormone.
Yeah.
And they're an evolutionary adaptation in which, in order for me to slip into ketosis, I need to be calorically restricted, as well as be eating mainly kind of like meat and fat. Now, without the caloric restriction, I don't find that I actually go into it. And when I do use that combination of caloric restriction, so, I'm eating in like a 4-hour window, or I'm eating once a day and I'm just eating this bunch of meat, a few things for me will happen where I have to do that, because otherwise I wind up actually swinging all over the place and I get this nasty amount of hunger. But by going through and eating that, pound of meat at a time, I do wind up with that laser focus. Or whether I'm like, I can drag that through the day, but I require that caloric restriction. But when I explain to people that are really, really big fans of this, it's like that laser focus that happens as a result of you eating basically meat and nothing else. In that caloric restriction, you're getting that laser focus as an evolutionary adaptation, because you need to go and kill things. Right? We need to go through and get home to the food stores. And to go through and have you feeling sluggish, evolutionary didn't make sense.
Absolutely.
But we can only run in that red line up at that zone for so long before we're going to crash. And it sounds like that's kind of what happened to you with your cortisol belly.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head there. We would not have survived as a species 3.5 million years of evolution if we couldn't eat every 2 hours like a bodybuilder. That's just not realistic. And if you got tired and you couldn't hunt for 5 days without food, then the human race would have just ended. Simple as that. So it's a really good adaptation. I've tried experimenting even with the really expensive, really good quality liquid ketones from human. And I agree with you. I think what's happening when you don't have the caloric restriction and you have lots of calories from fat and protein, what you're doing is you're converting a significant amount of that protein and fat into glucose via gluconeogenesis, requiring the stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. And it's interesting because a lot of bodybuilders, including myself at one point, thought, well, hey, man, I should just eat 350 grams of protein a day because a bunch of that's going to get turned into glucose and it's going to be lost in the process. And I get to get the satiety. I get to fill myself up and eat more food, which will help me grow and be bigger and stronger. But I didn't take into account the cortisol and adrenaline. A lot of those people are covering up the consequences of that through the use of anabolic agents of different kinds. So again, it's easy to distract.
So for me, that's a bit of a pet peeve. Anyone that's going through and is running gear or using exogenous supplementation of hormones. And so here's the thing. I 100% do not have a problem with people using performance enhancing drugs. And the reason I say that is because somebody that's doing that, it wants to be the best. What my issue with that is, somebody who is on HRT, somebody who is using PEDs does not get to sit at the same table when it comes to giving advice to every person or advice focused to people that aren't on gear about nutrition. And the reason I say that is because when somebody's like, oh, I'm a raw food vegan and a bodybuilder, if I can do this, you can do this.
Yeah.
No, because you're going through an exogenously, like you're going through and getting your testosterone and your growth hormone levels and all that are being bumped up, and you don't have to worry about what your iron levels are, what your selenium and your manganese are doing. You don't have to worry about your zinc. You don't have to worry about your vitamin A and all those things that we're typically getting from animal proteins or the consumption of animal flesh along with protein. So for me, that like their arguments are non-starters, and it just annoys me when they're like, oh, I do this, so everyone should do this. It's like, you're on gear, you get to give advice to people who are on gear.
Yeah, think about it's before your time, the 80s and the 90s, let's say, for Muscle Magazine, right? They'd have all these workouts by these pros. And I was gullible at the time, and I thought, well, frack, if these guys can do these workouts and they're not on drugs, I should be able to do these workouts too. And the reality is exactly what you said. These guys recover so fast. They're using drugs to give them a super physiological level of testosterone and hormones that just you can't achieve otherwise. And hence they reap the benefits of that and some of the negative effects depending on dosage, depending on the person. But they reap the benefits of recovery. These guys work out like maniacs one day and they're ready to go the next day. Some of us have a good workout like that and we're shattered for a week, especially the older you get, the slower the recovery. So yeah, I think anything that gets said by somebody on a bunch of gear, when it's aimed at people that aren't on gear, needs to be taken with a very large grain of salt or given some really clear context.
100%. When we had gone through it, released our initial program, El Russo, and all of our fugitive fitness programs, people go through and look at them like, oh, but like I want to train 6 days a week. And so in some ways, the way that we've structured what our training and using bands and all that is to make it so that, like, well, actually, we need you to be able to recover and be fresh, because we're assuming that you need to be functional and dynamic situations at the drop of a hat. So by going through and using bands, it's something that's easier on the nervous system. We wanted to make sure that there weren't going to be recovery issues. So we went through and built it for that. And people and some people contact us and they've been like, oh, well, what about if, like someone's in the special forces, or they're doing ground force work, or they're doing whatever. Well, like those guys do it if they want, they can be on gear. It's like, well, the person doesn't really honestly know what they're talking about, because there's certain logistical issues about being in the field and needing to maintain a dosing protocol of exogenous hormones. So going through and setting up those training protocols and setting up your diet so that it isn't based around the need for an exogenous hormone or an HRT type of cycle is definitely worth paying attention to, especially for the topic that's or the specifics of the fugitive fitness and kind of our market, I guess.
Well, what I like about the evolution of the fugitive fitness programs it's something like you've said before many times. I want to parrot everything you've said here because I prefer to use my own words, but the fact that you can do it anywhere, you can scale it. You're using low impact tools like bands, which are, I'm sure your listeners probably understand that something like 90% of injuries happen during the eccentric load at the end of range of motion. So it's what happened with me. I tore both my biceps different times. In both cases, it was eccentric loading, end of range of motion, pop. So you're not going to see that very easily with a band. Bands, I love the strength curve on a band is awesome. And I think it's also really good because you can, the overtraining component is something that a lot of people fall into. And I think what happens is they see these freaks of nature. I mean, remember the guys that make it through selection into special forces, wherever they are in the world, are the elite of the elite. And it's like getting to the NFL. These guys are, who can do a full-on sprint and then do a front flip over two other guys that are going to tackle them and do all that decision-making in microseconds, right? So people are comparing themselves to that, and they're giving themselves beat-down workouts, thinking they need to be ready for a special forces operation. That in their subconscious, that's the way they're looking at it. And they're not thinking about the need for periodization and training cycles and thinking, okay, how do I peak in a period of time? Because I can't peak and maintain a peak. I mean, if professional boxers and MMA fighters and jiu-jitsu guys can't do that, I don't know why the average guy thinks that they're going to hit PRs every freaking time that they work out and it's just going to get better. That doesn't work that way. You're trying to be in that red line, as you said, to use your words, long term, the consequence of that is exactly what I did to myself, and one of the things that I know you fight, which is the overtraining. And for me, the overtraining led to one injury after another, and I just kept working around the injuries and accumulating more injuries. So I don't recommend that.
Yeah, and I mean, so the listeners understand, the only reason that I'm not as banged up as Kevin is because I met Kevin years ago and just listened to how he injured himself and didn't do those things. So it's completely avoidable. And just kind of going through, and if I can recommend you find somebody that's bag bandages, that's about 15 years ahead of you, and then just listen to how they injured themselves and avoid doing that. That's a real good way to do it. To your point about the level of athleticism of the guys that make it through selection of a tier 1 special forces unit, in old country in Russia, the people that were training for the Olympics, if you went there for wrestling or you went there for sambo or, gymnastics, stuff like that, there's the people that went to the Olympics and you remember their names and you saw them perform. Of the people that were maybe 3rd or 4th or 5th in the country, right? Top 10 of the country for sambo. And I mean, Russia is an absolutely massive country, right? So they're drawing from a pool of 150 million people, right? So the people that were the top 10 in sambo, in wrestling, in gymnastics, they went to the specimen. So the people that were at the top of the field at Olympic level, they went to the ones that didn't go to the Olympics, they went to the special forces. And the specimens are no joke. Their selection process killed one in one. It was estimated that at least 100 of 150 people going through, one person would die. And understand what it takes to even get selected to try out for the specimen. So that's the level of athleticism that we're looking at, and it's very difficult for most people to appreciate the level of athleticism that an Olympian has. And it's not that all are created equal, but in figure skating, Canada put out an Olympic level athlete, a male figure skater that was known for doing backflips on figure skates on the ice, and his name's Kurt Browning. I had the opportunity to work with a guy that was a he went as an alternate to the Olympics, and I had met him 25 years after he'd gone to that. His name was Freddie, and he was so burnt out from the training that he had done. He went to the Olympics in '96 for France. And so he was so burnt out from that lifetime of training up to that point that he just said, to hell with it. And so he just coached kids gymnastics. And so I had a chance to kind of work with him and be coached with him on a few skills. And I asked him one day, I'm like, can you still do a backflip? He said, yes, of course. And I said, like, if I put an X on that ground and had you stand on it, could you do a backflip and land it on there? And he goes, oh, yeah, like obviously. And so it wasn't even like a question in his mind that this guy who hadn't trained in 20 some years could just pop, and he did it. He just like didn't kind of jump up, just like bang, just hit that back up and stuck it exactly where he was standing. And it was 20 years after that, was a man in his mid 40s. And so when you have that level of athlete that winds up going through the special forces programs, or sort of coming out of selection, yeah, like it's just a different kettle of fish, right? They just come from a different quality of stock.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, is that people are comparing themselves, to, it's unfair competition. Not that life is supposed to be fair, or the competition is even going to be fair, but there's these guys are like freak genetics or freak levels of personal drive, and then incredible levels of training and coaching to get to where they're at. And the average Joe is comparing himself to that. It just doesn't, I don't think they realize that it's not a comparison that's going to hold up. And not only that, I think they forget that the old adage that says the candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long. I don't think that operating at peak for long periods of time is something that's going to extend your life. I think it's something that's going to shorten your life.
If you try to do it without periodization, I would say it's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Now with all that said, I'm sure we can agree that there's the ability to go through and maintain a great deal of physical prowess into the golden years, especially for men. Having had a chance to be around some trades guys, and just seeing some of these guys. There was a guy, his name was Dino, this old German, and at 67 years old, he still had 15 to 30 seconds of hell in him that I don't think I could handle. But it was his lifetime of doing manual labor. Right? You shake his hand, and it's like grabbing a hold of a fistful of sausages. And he had that fingertip to elbow thickness that just was there, that tendon strength. He was broad in the back, right, like broad in the shoulders, and he still had he still had a thick ass and a thick set of legs. And like listening to these guys talk, like for them 20 years ago, 30 years ago, to be unloading a barrel of fuel, like a 55-gallon drum, 55-gallon drum of fuel off of a truck because they didn't have a hoist. When they said that they did it, it didn't surprise me. And to go through and see them still to be exceptionally strong, I would suggest that it's possible to maintain those high levels of strength well into your golden years if the training is done properly, as long as you don't get injured.
I agree. And I think that's the biggest thing, is if you can stay uninjured and you can consistently get, your half hour of training every day, 6 days a week, for 20 years, you're further ahead than a guy like my stupid self that thought, well, if one's good, 10's got to be better. So let's just do as many as we can all the time to failure and whatever, try all the extreme shit and then pay the price, because I bought into that paradigm, more is better. But I love I don't know where the quote comes from, but I learned it at a Z Health course. And the quote is, more is not better, better is better. And That is.
Couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
It's just brilliant stuff.
It's one of those lessons that we tend to keep learning and relearning. For me, one of the things that I definitely struggle, as we mentioned, with is the overtraining, and partly it's because I'm just so damn fascinated with the science that goes into all of it, and getting stuck in this trap of daily addition of training protocols. So whether that's I gotta get the big 3 up. It's like, and look at these parallels in these gymnastics rings. Like, oh man, those guys are really strong, and so I'm gonna do that. And but bands have some great benefits, so I'm gonna do that. Oh, Olympic lifts, that looks great. And then hill sprints, and then you start going through, and for me, one of the quotes that I really, really like actually comes from a gal who's got a podcast called the Afford Anything podcast. Her name's Paula Pant. And she has this quote, and she says, you can do anything, you can afford anything, but you can't do or afford everything.
Oh, I love that.
And it really hit home, because in this case, what we're talking about is afford. Afford is not necessarily financial. Afford is, what is it that I can recover from? Yep. I forget who it was. There was a fellow a while back, and he was talking about, we can't. It's not that we overtrain; it's that we under recover.
Yep.
And so in the El Russo program, in the nutrition section, one of the things that I talked about, that I mentioned, is okay, here's what I suggest for the diet. If you notice that you suddenly put on some weight, or you're not making you kind of stall in your gains, there's a few things that you can do. But one of the things that I suggest is add another potato or 2 potatoes to your daily intake. And people are like, that's stupid, right? I'm not making gains, and you say eat some potatoes. Well, here's the thing: you're under fueled, right? You're not sufficiently recovering those glycogen stores. There's a whole bunch of science that goes kind of into that. But they're like, right. So I come to you and say, I'm not strong enough, not recovering. You're like, eat the pierogies. But actually, right? You probably just need a little more food. Is what the biggest thing is, right? But nobody wants to hear that.
Well, it was really hard for me to accept as well. I have a buddy of mine who's a professional IFBB pro in Masters. His name is Joe Tong. And good friend for, how long have we been friends now? I'm 49, and we've been friends since 27, so that's 27 or 28, so more than 20 years. And he used to be with the 10th Mountain. I think he's done twice. He's been in the armed forces, and 10th Mountain is no joke. He's a really high-level trained cardiac nurse, an emergency room nurse, I believe. Lots of training, smart dude. You look him up, he's great. And I remember that he was telling me, I used to, exactly what the numbers were, something like, he said when I was off season, I used to be down to 350 grams of carbs, and I'd be 350 grams of protein. And this is an IFBB pro, right? This is a master's level pro. Guy's doing bodybuilding for a long time. And he said he got introduced to this other guy. I can't remember his name, so bear with me on that one. But you look him up, I'm sure you'll run into him. And he changed his program his diet, so that off season he said he was on 1,200 or 1,300 grams of carbs. Now do the numbers on that, man. That is a lot of carbs. This guy's on gear, so he needs the calories, especially going to maintain that muscle mass. Now think about that. I'm like, how did you do that and not get fat? He goes, well, not only did I increase my carbohydrates 4 times, he said, but I actually reduced my protein intake down to 200, 250 grams. I'm like, explain that. As well, I'm no longer converting all this protein into glucose to fuel my workouts and my recovery. And now he goes, I can recover way faster because I have sufficient fuel, and because I'm no longer wasting the protein to turn it into sugar or glucose. I use those 2 words interchangeably, even though they're not 100% accurate, because sugar, table sugar, is 50% glucose, 50% fructose. So bear with me. I should probably have explained that earlier, but let's just say I should try to switch to glucose. So by having more glucose in the system, he was able to not waste the protein, which was able to be used as a substrate for recovery, and everything else was powered by glucose. And it was night and day for him in terms of energy level, recovery, put on extra mass, heal faster, and so on and so forth. And I think people don't understand this kind of stuff because there's too much bro science, too much of the same kind of myths floating around in gyms.
For me, when I work with somebody and somebody wants to, because I've been the adjunct physiotherapist and personal trainer in a whole bunch of remote sites, going through and just helping people sort their lives out. And one of the things that I typically recommend for nutrition is I get them to cut out bread, I get them to cut out grain, potato, rice, and alcohol, and to not drink their calories. And so people will be like, "Oh, so you think that I'm like gluten intolerant? You want me to go carb free?" And what I've found is it's not. It doesn't seem to be the issue of what the macro is. It's that with starches in particular, people seem to be consuming a lot more calories than they realize. So when I go through and I get somebody to, okay, you can have bacon and eggs, you can have all the steak and salad that you want, all the meat and vegetables that you want, but it's not that I'm going through and I think that they're getting an inflammatory response from grain. They might be. It's or the potatoes are evil. It's that they're consuming way more calories than they realize. And so if we're drinking our calories, like if we're drinking pop, you're going to be consuming a lot more calories than you realize. And that becomes a problem. I worked with a guy and he consumed he estimated that it was between 12 to 14 cans of Coca-Cola in 12 hours. So if you go through and do the math on that, that is almost more than my basal metabolic rate. Is like, just for me to be alive, he is consuming more calories just in Coca-Cola than I need in a day before my workout. And then on top of going through and eating, the guy made himself diabetic, if you're wondering. But it seems to be that people are consuming a lot more calories is the problem than they realize, and that's what's leading to the obesity. Pardon me?
I said I would agree. I think that's one of the biggest components of it, not this macronutrient or that macronutrient. And the other one is the vast kind of the preponderance in all the foods of polyunsaturated fatty acids. If you join those two together, which is what the flavored guys love to do, you got all this extra calories. And there's nothing wrong with, like, people give me a hard time when I say, if you need some, take some sugar. Like, if your fruit isn't tasting good and it's not sweet enough, put some granulated sugar on the plate and dip your strawberries in it, or whatever it is that you're having. And because strawberries and blueberries and raspberries and all that stuff are really low calorie, but they're really good nutrition. So sugar is just pure fuel. And there's nothing wrong with pure fuel or a Coke if you need fuel. But you don't want to be getting the bulk of your calories from there. You need not be thinking so much about this macro or that macro, but are you getting enough fuel to do what you want to do in terms of recovery and training? And do you get enough nutrition to do the same, right? And it's easy to, when I was trying to heal my metabolism, one of the ways to do that is overeating. And I put on 50 pounds doing that. But one of the interesting things about using fuel, like glucose and glycogen and sugar, table sugar and fructose, when I was eating a balanced diet, like let's say like a 40-40-20 or something like that, or a 40-30-30 or whatever, if I lowered fat intake to around 5%, which is not that easy to do, I could increase my calorie intake from 3,800 calories it's like in my mid 40s, so a few years ago. I could increase total calories for the day from 3,800 to 4,800 and not gain weight. But I would have a hard time feeling satiated. So there's something that happens when you have a lot of easy to use fuel, you'd get a bump in temperature. My temperature would hit almost 39 degrees Celsius. It was uncomfortable for me. And I tend to sweat pretty easy anyways. So when your body temperature is at 39, which feels almost like you have a fever, and you're sweating, sweat's running down every part of your body, down every crack, and you're not even doing anything, that's what happens when you have an excess of fuel and you don't have the polyunsaturated fats suppressing metabolism. So going back to where I started, if you have a food, go ahead.
So if I can just interrupt you, because I'm on the same page, but I just want to make sure everyone's up to speed. Why does anyone give a damn about what their body temperature is? Like, who cares?
Great question. So if you want to know what your health is doing, so when I finally figured out some of the stuff I was doing wrong with my metabolism that crashed it, my body temperature on waking would be below 36 degrees. My pulse would be really low, like 45. And you might make the argument, well, doesn't that mean your heart's really efficient? And I'm like, I'm not a long distance runner, man. And even if I was a long distance runner, I would make you the argument that the wear and tear of 125 miles of running or 180 kilometers a week is putting so much demand on your body that your body is slowing down metabolism the rest of the time that you're not running, so that it can hold on to the little bit of resources that you're leaving it. And so if you want health, think the argument I often make is, okay, cancer has a really high speed metabolism. Those cells run on their own. It's a last ditch effort by them to survive, and it's high speed typically. If your metabolism, including your immune system and your self-defense measures and T cells and all that stuff, is in low gear and cancer's in high gear, the outcome on that one is not going to be good. So you want a high metabolism, like a hummingbird. So you want to fuel that thing, and the only way you're going to know how that's working is when you wake up in the morning. Before you roll out of bed, you take your pulse with your phone that you can use, or a Fitbit or some kind of wearable, and you can use like an ear thermometer or something like that, and take 2 or 3 readings to make sure that's accurate, and log those two. Now let's say, for an example, that you had a heart rate somewhere between 65 and 80, and you had a temperature of somewhere in 37s, like maybe 37 flat or something. It's a pretty decent temperature on waking. You don't know with just one set of readings what's going on. So now you start your day, you go and you have whatever your breakfast is. You should know, after taking these measurements for a while, which foods bump both temperature and pulse up. That means metabolically that is good for you. If you get a drop from a food that you know is good for you, so one of the two drops or both drop, you know that the previous reading on waking was propped up by cortisol and adrenaline. So what happens to me, I'll use myself as an example, my liver, after all these years of whatever loads I've put on it, and fasting and all that kind of stuff, the liver is where you store all glycogen that you use to top up everything else. So if I put glycogen in my biceps and then I'm working out my triceps and I don't have enough glycogen in my triceps, I can't move it from my biceps to my triceps. So if I need glycogen for those triceps or for my legs to run or fight or run away from something, I have to pull it from my liver, which requires vitamins, which we can touch on another time. So if I run out of glycogen during my sleep, or let's say 2 things could happen. I don't have enough vitamins to pull the glycogen out at a sufficient rate from my liver, or I didn't have enough B vitamins to store sufficient glycogen in my liver, some combination of the above, or something else is going on that I'm not able to store sufficient glycogen to get through the night. And we think that a healthy human liver for a guy in his 20s or 30s probably lasts 20 hours, assuming you're not doing a Metcon or some other crap like that, right? Like, it's just, you could fast for 20 hours probably at a low level of intensity, just living, doing your stuff, going to your job, and not create stress. Now, anything that decreases that gas tank capacity is a problem. And in my case, if I don't have sufficient calories through the day to store in my liver, I will wake up more times in the night and have to go pee. And I wonder why that is, because adrenaline is a diuretic. And so when I don't have enough glycogen to keep my blood sugar stable while sleeping, because sleeping requires energy like everything else, then your body releases adrenaline and cortisol to create gluconeogenesis and turn fats and proteins into sugar or glucose to fuel the sleep. But the problem is you get that diuretic effect. Now you fill your bladder and that wakes you up and you have to go and take a piss, then you come back to bed and you're still in that up and down cycle of running on the glucose that you just created. Then when that drops again, because you didn't eat anything, the whole cycle repeats and you find yourself waking up 2, 3, 4, 5 times a night to go pee. You've got a problem with liver glycogen storage. And that needs to be addressed for you to be able to get good quality sleep, because if you don't get good quality sleep, recovery period is going to be destroyed. And we know from the best research done around the globe that anything less than 7 hours of sleep a night, you are flirting with every disease known to man, from Alzheimer's, diabetes, high blood pressure, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and on and on and on.
That's wild. So if one of the things that the director Kevin Smith had been noted about doing, and he lost a whole bunch of weight, and there's some other people that have touted it as well, is the potato only diet for losing weight.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could speak to why that actually happens, why it works. I think Penn Jillette was another one.
Yeah, so the beauty of potatoes is, so potatoes are about 10% by weight protein. And what seems to be, because of the keto acids and a few other things that are in there, it seems that the protein quality of a potato is higher than the protein quality of milk. I don't know by how much, but it seems to be a little bit higher. You would probably have to eat about 3 kilograms of potatoes a day to get your needs met. And then I don't know how long you could go on like that for. I haven't looked deeply into it. But there's another diet called, that's based on the rice diet that was used, white rice diet, that was used to also have a similar effect. If you cut calories and yet you're providing enough of the basics, and the people are overweight, just like going back to our initial part of this conversation, people have enough vitamins and minerals kind of stored in their body that as they lose weight, they're pulling that out of storage and using that to top up any deficiencies in the diet that they're actually on. So you have to create a calorie deficit in some form, whether that's through extreme exercise or like light exercise all the way up to extreme exercise. Imagine the people that do high altitude climbing, the amount of food that they have to eat. And I don't know if you've been up at altitude. I did Kilimanjaro and a few other high altitude peaks, and my interest in carbohydrates ramps up significantly at altitude. And I think that has to do with the way that your body just wants efficient sources of calories. And I found that I was like cramming, like when the guys would bring us food, I would be like hammering through a roll of cookies or whatever else just to try to get enough calories to keep going. I know some people espouse high-fat diets for long climbs, and I suppose just like endurance runs, that could work as well. And just probably all about preparing, but I found that was my personal experience.
Is there a preference of proteins? Like, so when, as far as what it is we can digest, right? So we go through and we look at the back of the whey isolate container, and it says, right, like for me, I'm always looking for, well, when I consume whey isolate, I'm so sick of it at this point, as far as the protein shakes go, but I'd always be looking for what gave me the most grams of protein per scoop, what the highest ratio was. So if I could find something that was 30 grams of protein or 28 grams of protein, and the scoop was like 30 grams, 32 grams, I was kind of happy. Is there a difference in the effectiveness? Is a gram of protein equal to a gram of protein when I'm dealing with whey, or I'm dealing with beef or something like that, eggs, etc.?
Well, so here's the problem. It's a great question. I don't know that anybody can give you a perfect answer or an answer that is, 100% tight or accurate. But think of it like this. There's a lot of different ways where they measure protein quality or protein bioavailability or usability of the protein net nitrogen utilization, these kind of things. A lot of that stuff is done in vitro, so it's not done in vivo, right? Or if it's done in vivo, it's hard. There's too many other factors at play. Like, how do you know if you feed a pig X amount of protein and you measure the nitrogen excreted? Like, how do you know that X pig versus Y pig? Like, if there's a vitamin deficiency or genetic difference, stress level difference, whatever, different gut biome. Like, how do you control all those things to understand how that protein is being digested in every circumstance? So I don't know that anybody can say, hand on heart, this is the perfect way to measure, protein quality, usability, et cetera. What we do tend to see, so we got into doing this research or looking at the research because a friend of mine, a mentor of mine, in fact, was in stage 3 renal failure. So that's kidney failure. And we started following the chain back. And so the kidneys could be overloaded by a number of things, but they could be overloaded by a bunch of urea coming from the liver. Okay, so what causes urea? So urea is the byproduct of converting ammonia. So what causes ammonia? And you go, well, in the gut, so protein is not the part that you use. Just like a starch is not something that you use. It doesn't go across into the bloodstream to be used as a starch. It's a long chain. That's a long chain sugar, oligosaccharide. So if you are going to use it, you have to cut it down into little chunks, basically glucose, and then it passes across, and then you can use it. Same thing with proteins. Proteins are complete chains, and you can't use them like that, so they have to be broken down into amino acids. But the problem seems to be that breaking them down creates ammonia. And if you've ever smelled that stuff, you know how toxic it is. And the same thing.
It smells like a chicken coop for anyone that's unaware.
Yeah. So you break it down, and it seems that the one with the best breakdown is eggs, where you lose 55% of the protein value. Now, this should blow people's minds. The typical egg, large egg in most of your trackers, is 50 grams total weight. Of that 50 grams, 6 grams is protein. If you lose 55%, we'll just call it 50 for ease of numbers, you've lost 3 grams of protein to ammonia. And that means you're left with 3 grams out of 50, right? That's a tiny proportion. And the same thing goes with steak, eggs, everything else you care to name.
I'm going to keep eating steak. I don't care. It just tastes good.
I know.
It feels good.
I'm a big fan too, trust me. I've been cooking a lot of picanha lately. So if everything's worse than eggs, then the numbers just get worse. So I think dairy is 70%. Meat, all the different meats are like 25. You only get to keep 25%. Dairy, you get 30. Plant proteins seem like you only get to keep 15% of the protein that comes out of a plant. Hence the need to consume a lot of it. And it's already, most plant foods are already low in total protein. So it becomes, inefficient that way. You see a lot of, people in the developing world that are on vegetarian diets that get a lot of volume are just as fat as people that eat McDonald's all the time, So quality. So if you look at it that way, quality ranges quite a bit depending where you get it from. And then there's other problems that people don't think about typically, which you and I have discussed on separate conversations. So one of the common contaminants in whey proteins is heavy metals. And heavy metals have a lot of negative effects in the body. And at the volume that people consume things like whey protein, it's the number one recommended protein everywhere. But people don't look at how was the product made.
So we're talking heavy metals, or are we talking mainly chromium or?
Usually it's cadmium, mercury, lead, and I'm trying to remember there's another one because we test for it as well in our product.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out where you're getting mercury and lead from. The only reason I ask is like chromium, cadmium, and nickel would make sense as their components of stainless steel, and so being used in vats. I'm just trying to figure out where your lead and mercury would come from.
I'm not sure. I need to look into that, but I think a lot of this stuff depends on not so much what vat it's stored in, because stainless is pretty non-reactive, but how the handling process, like from where it's picked up, how it's turned into whey protein from milk, let's say, and then how it's turned into powder from there and so on, and how it's stored, and all kinds of aspects of this that will just turn your head in all kinds of circles. And so what people need to think is, or what I would suggest people should consider is, I want protein, and I want quality protein, so it should be easily absorbable. So then you should be thinking more about amino acids rather than protein. And when you're
like branched chain amino acids, like BCAAs and essential amino acids?
Yeah, so BCAAs are a great place to start, because a rate limiter seems to be leucine in terms of protein anabolism. So a BCAA is really good. The downside to BCAAs is long-term use of BCAAs is correlated with depleting the dopamine and serotonin pathways in the brain. And I would have no problem depleting serotonin because it's associated with a bunch of things like depression, especially the stuff that's created in the brain. 95% of serotonin is created in the gut in response to stress. It's linked to peristalsis, the movement of food through the gut. So that's a whole other conversation. But BCAAs can deplete dopamine, which is the one you don't want, because then you lose your zest for life. It sucks the fun out of everything, and what happened? I noticed this happen to me many times. I'd just be pounding the BCAAs, and then I'd just, like, after some time, I'd be like, hey man, I haven't taken my BCAAs in like a week. How did I forget that? Because your body just realizes, or you keep taking them and you just decide you don't want to train anymore. But I would just realize that I didn't want them because they were creating that kind of an effect in me. And so BCAAs are great, but you need to supplement taurine and phenylalanine. And they're really important to maintain the dopamine pathway and still allow you to deplete serotonin. And actually, we've seen that people that use that combination, BCAAs, phenylalanine, and taurine, a lot of them can get off of antidepressants and have had or lower the amount of antidepressants. There's a really interesting research done using BCAAs, phenylalanine, and taurine for depression.
So what's the difference between the BCAAs, the branched chain amino acids, which leucine, valine, and isoleucine, if I'm correct?
Yep.
What's the difference between those and what it's sometimes marketed as EAAs, the essential amino acids?
So essential amino acids, that comes from research that basically said, hey, listen, you need these to create protein, because you can't manufacture them, or so it goes, or you can't manufacture enough of them to be relatively useful. So these are required for protein anabolism. The problem is that several of them, like cysteine, histidine, I can never say that word, methionine, whatever, tryptophan, they all are really abundant in the average North American, European diet. And these things are really easily converted into stress hormones. And let me give you an example. So not stress hormones, but hormones that have negative effects. Like, so histidine is easily turned into histamine, which you need to have a histaminic response in the event that, you get bitten by something that's bad for you, right? But a runaway histamic response would be bad. Tryptophan is really easily turned into serotonin. Serotonin is a stress hormone, by any measure that in the world that I live in, anyways. And so
just to kind of get a few people up to speed, tryptophan is the protein in turkey that when you eat it, it makes you tired. And you're saying histamine?
Histidine.
Yeah, histidine is a precursor to a histamine response. Majority of allergy medications are an antihistamine, so they're a histamine blocker.
Yeah. So what happens is if you consume beta alanine, so think of those four amino acids as more than they're not bad. They have their place, but we have so much of them. We have too many of them, and if you have these pathways that can lead to an overabundance of things that aren't good for you, then we just thought, let's get them out of that combination. Let's not use those because we thought, well, we want to have something that's beneficial across the board. So beta alanine, probably your listeners have heard of that. So beta alanine, when mixed with histidine, turns into basically it's an antihistamine, creates carnosine. And if you've ever done any reading on carnosine, it's amazing at what it can do. It has amazing benefits for athletes, heart, brain, eyes, diabetes. It's a super powerful antioxidant, right up there with SOD, superoxidase dismutase, I believe that's what that is. So it helps with aging, complications from diabetes, nerve damage, eye disorders, kidney problems, like amazing. So if you have a product that has beta alanine in it, it will bond with that histidine and create carnosine, giving you the benefit. And you can only take carnosine by IV. It doesn't work any way orally. It gets destroyed in the gut. And that comes from the mixture between the beta alanine and the histidine. So glycine bonds with excess cysteine and creates glutathione. Again, glutathione, the only way you can get it is IV or IM. So unless you want to take, intravenous or intramuscular shots, you can't get glutathione in a usable form. And that improves sleep quality, recovery, lowers inflammation, provides building blocks for neurotransmitters. It's super useful stuff. And all of these things have their place, but if we have too much of something, it's like the BCAAs. They're great on their own, but not for too long. So if you want to keep using them, you have to have taurine and phenylalanine. So again, that same thing goes. If we've got too much cysteine, histidine, methionine, or whatever you say that, tryptophan, then what can we do to create a better ratio inside your own body of those things? You're going to be eating muscle meats, and muscle meats typically are missing glycine. The glycine, you normally find that, like if you've heard of gelatin, which a lot of people supplement with, gelatin, the one thing in gelatin that's really important is the glycine. So again, you want to get lots of glycine, and the glycine can be very helpful because it balances out your consumption of meat, getting that amino acid that's always short if you eat just muscle meats, because people aren't eating gizzards and organ meats and all that kind of stuff. So they're actually not getting a really balanced ratios of proteins. But essential amino acids, just to be brief, they would be useful if you were taking carbohydrates, I suppose, but most carbohydrates still have amino acids in them, some level of protein, but basically they're done on their own. Like if you were taking nothing else, a glass of water and some essential amino acids, I suppose there could be a benefit there. Otherwise, I wouldn't take them because diet's too high in those 4 amino acids. So I wouldn't supplement with a product that had them.
Okay. And so if we just quickly on gelatin, with a lot of people looking for kind of joint supplements and stuff like that, because as one of the guys I really enjoyed his work over the years, Ido Portal, says you're as old as your joints feel. Going through and looking at glucosamine, chondroitin, and various joint supplements, I've found that I get the exact same results from simply taking a collagen protein or just going to the grocery store and buying some Knox gelatin, or whichever brand your local is, and going through and mixing that up with some juice. What advantages or disadvantages are there to doing something like that?
I've experimented a lot with MSM and chondroitin and all that stuff because I'm a sucker for marketing, so I give that stuff a try. I don't know if there's some crazy dose that's required, but I've never been able to get a positive outcome from those products. I have way better results with lowering inflammation with gelatin or heavy glycine supplementation. So like 3 to 5 grams of glycine before bed. It also helps a lot with sleep. So I definitely a firm believer in and that's the part of gelatin that is the money shot, right? That's the stuff that you want. That's the hidden treasure in the gelatin is the glycine. And dose is
so that'd be about half a packet of gelatin.
Yeah, it's something I can't remember exactly what the dose is in gelatin. Like I just made some Jello with I used milk, like a low fat milk. I used 8 tablespoons of gelatin, and I used some sugar. I think I used I want to say 4 tablespoons of sugar. 4 tablespoons of cocoa, 4 tablespoons of sugar, 8 tablespoons of gelatin, 2 bananas, and 4 cups of milk. And I made Jello from that, and that's an easy to eat snack right out of the fridge. Not super easy.
I'll make gummy bears.
Yeah, that's another option. Gummy bears is great. I prefer not to use water as a base. I would use a juice because of the nutrition. So I would use like an orange juice or some other juice that had some vitamins, minerals I want in it. Or I'd use milk because I want the calcium. Calcium is so critical for energy and so critical for maintaining a good calcium phosphorus ratio, which is anti-cancer, a bunch of benefits that are really key and really important.
Excellent. So just to go through and I guess give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about AminoPro. How calorically dense is it, like versus something like whey or trying to? I mean, because as we talked about earlier, the real name of the game seems to be keeping those calories in order. But when we talked about the example of your IFBB pro bodybuilder, he's still going through and hitting a little more than a gram of protein per pound of body weight. And then he's going through and hitting his 120 whatever, 120 1,200 grams of carbs a day. So for the average person, they're not going to have the same training volume, but for them to go through and be able to have a low calorie complete protein and then just kind of focus on carbs, what would we be looking at for that?
I'm not sure I got clear on the question.
So what's the caloric load per gram of protein with something like the AminoPro versus something like steak or dairy or something else, something like that? Because we had talked about earlier in the show that that if we can keep the calories down, we can still improve the markers just by that. So if we can go through and hit the macros and get the protein where we need it to be while keeping the calories down, that would be kind of double whammy, if I understand.
Yeah, no, exactly. So because it's not a complete protein, we have there's 9 amino acids in AminoPro. Normally, a gram of protein or carbs is 4 calories. This is not a complete protein, so because it doesn't have those 4 essential amino acids that we consider to be in abundance in most diets and easy to get. We don't want to drive any pro-inflammatory responses. So it's 1.4 calories per gram. And when you compare it to different whole foods, this is how it roughly breaks out. Because remember, go back to the egg example. 50 grams of egg gives you 6 grams of protein. Half of that is what you actually get to use, which is 3 grams. And every other food is worse. So imagine the following in your hand. 1.3 cups of milk, right? So you know what that looks like. You know what 1.4 ounces of ribeye looks like. No visible fat eaten. What does half a kilo or 410 grams of cooked quinoa? That's a pretty big volume. We're talking almost 2 cups, right? And that's a large volume of food. Each of those things has the following breakdown in terms of calories. 1.3 cups of skim milk is 108 calories. 1.4 ounces of ribeye is 99 calories. 410 grams of cooked quinoa is 492 calories. Each of those, because of the different levels of conversion or bioavailability, the dairy protein is 10 grams of protein. The meat, fish, poultry, 1.4 ounces in this case of ribeye is 12 grams. The plant protein from 410 grams of quinoa is 18 grams. Now, if you look at the how much you lose to ammonia, you can get the same amount of protein from 6 capsules of AminoPro. So imagine 6 capsules in your hand, and that's equivalent to the 1.3 cups of milk, 1.4 ounces of ribeye, 410 grams of cooked quinoa, and it'll be a total of 4.8 calories. So you can get all your protein needs met, let's not say all, let's say the bulk of your protein needs met by taking the Amino Pro and then taking some carbohydrates that you enjoy, and you've created a deficit of anywhere between 95 to 487 calories that you could do with something else. You can either use that deficit to drive your diet, like to create the deficit you need in your diet, or you could take half of it as a deficit and the other half of it as some carbs that you like, because those carbs are going to have the other amino acids, the 4 amino acids that we have that allow you to complete protein, and you're going to enjoy the fact that you're eating a half a potato or a Snickers bar, for God's sakes. I don't really care. You should choose foods that have higher nutrition, but you could eat anything. And when I'm in a pinch and I'm traveling and I know that I need some fuel and I need some amino acids in my body, I will get a juice, which you can get anywhere traveling. Like you can get an orange juice at any airport, or some other juice that you like, and I'll slam 6 to 10 caps of Amino Pro, and I'm good to go for another little while. Or I get a milk and I slam some Amino Pro. Carbs are easy to get. Even some freaking
couldn't agree more.
Some decent gummy bears, right? That's got some gelatin in it. It's got some glucose for fuel, and I pound some Amino Pro, and I'm good to go. And Amino Pro, the bottle size fits in any bag you can take with you, and it's 300 capsules. If you do the math, 300 capsules is 50 doses. That's 50 times 1.3 is what, about 80 cups of milk, or like, similar, like 80 ounces of ribeye or whatever. I mean, it's a lot of protein that you can carry with you really easily.
One of the the amino product, the Amino Pro product is also like good for people with dietary restrictions, like kosher and halal, because you have no animal products in there.
Yeah, it's actually vegan friendly, halal, kosher. It's made through a process called bacterial fermentation, so no animals are hurt in the process. So anybody can eat it. We spend probably close to 30% of the cost of manufacture is just in testing the quality and doing potency testing and making sure there's no bacteria content or heavy metals or any of that kind of jazz, and just making sure the quality is super, super pure and the ratios are perfect. That's why we sell it only in capsules, because the capsule allows us to get the ratios between the amino acids at just the right level, where they're supposed to be. And then we can encapsulate it in a vegetable gelatin or hypomethylose, I think it's called methylose capsule. And then those 300 capsules are in a bottle, so you've got double the protection. Think about your typical 2-pound protein jar. You open it, that protein has been in there since it was put in there, and there's air in there, so that causes oxidation. Every time you open it, you introduce more oxygen, which creates more oxidation and wears down the quality of your protein until you finish that bottle of protein. The bigger the container, the longer the oxidation is going to go on, and it's going to affect the proteins in there. Every time you open the bottle of Amino Pro, the air is only going to touch the capsules. The capsules provide a second barrier to oxidation, no problem. Or oxidation, no problem. Good for you, good for us.
Is there any science behind the speed of digestion of protein, or like how fast something hits? And
yeah.
What I mean by that is some people talk about like, you want to have cottage cheese or casein before bed because it'll keep you at kind of a more even keel, where a whey isolate, it creates this peak and this valley, and right, like as if the protein just shoots through your system. I definitely noticed that I see that effect with carbohydrates, where going through and having like a tablespoon of honey or molasses or something, some juice right before a workout, that I notice an increase, a sharp increase, and that I'm able to utilize that as well as topping up. Does that happen with proteins as well, or is that just a lot of bro science?
No, it's true. Especially amino acids, right? Like I shouldn't say protein, because protein takes time to be broken down. It has to be broken into its amino acids, but amino acids are already broken down, so they're ready to be picked up. So we have clients, good friends of ours, that had incredible testimonials. I would suggest people take a look at those on our Facebook page or on our web page. But some of them are super freaky athletes that take the stuff on an empty stomach and have had incredible results. But I rarely, unless it's before bed, there's always going to be amino acids floating around, right? So even if you take them by themselves, chances are they're going to mop up some excess of those 4 amino acids and create good things in your body. But I prefer to take them as a way to improve the nutrition of anything that I'm eating, whether it's typically carbs for fuel or a little bit of fat and maybe a different source of protein for some different amino acids. So it'll improve the ratios. And it slows down digestion, which for me as a general rule works better. So if you take it with a little bit of fat or you take it with a little bit of anything else, it's going to slow it down. Like I said, if I'm in a 9-line bind, I'm in a crush, I'm traveling, whatever, I'll drink a juice or half a Coke or whatever is available, and I'll give it a few minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, half an hour tops, and then I'll take my amino acids because they're going to get picked up in the first 100 centimeters, I believe, of the gut, and then pulled into the system because they're ready to be digested. As soon as that capsule breaks open, they're ready to be picked up because they don't need to be digested any further.
Why would you wait? Why would you just drink your OJ and use the OJ or the Coca-Cola or whatever form of liquid sugar you prefer to just wash down the Amino Pro? Why would you wait?
Well, typically, what I want is it doesn't. I guess 30 minutes is probably long, and often I take the easy path and I slam them both at the same time. It's only because the capsule takes a few minutes, 15 minutes, I think is the breakdown time for it to break open, and I want it to be there. I don't want to be necessarily taking protein without the fuel, because the fuel, if there's no fuel there, the protein, which is more expensive than the carbohydrate, is going to get potentially turned into glucose, and I don't want that. I don't want to turn. It's a premium product. Nobody else makes it because it costs so much fucking money to make. So why would I waste that turning it to glucose when what I really need is that as a substrate for repair and recovery, and then I'll fuel myself with whatever glucose is cheap to get my hands on. And
so if you're washing it, if you're using Coke or OJ to take the Amino Pro, wouldn't you already have glucose in the system by the time those capsules broke open?
That's what I mean. Is like I'm going to be already, if I take it at the same time, there's a potential risk if I'm already low in blood sugar that the Coke is going to be absorbed before, or going to be starting to be strongly absorbed before the capsules break open. So I want to give it a little bit of a lead time, even if it's a few minutes, because So
you take the Amino Pro first, and then you take the Coke after?
Well,
or you're taking the Coke first, and then you take the Amino Pro after?
Yeah, so you want to get the capsules breaking down, right? So I probably got that backwards when I was first saying it. I realize that now. I'm probably getting low in blood sugar myself. You want to get the capsules down your neck because you want them breaking open, and you want it at about the same time as the sugar gets in there. So yeah, sorry about that, man. I need to pound some Coke right now.
There you go. Down in Mexico, enjoy the stuff with the real sugar.
Oh man, I got a 500 ml glass bottle Coke right here. And it's pure magic.
Medio litro.
Exactly. I was going to say that. I'm glad you did.
Yeah. No, those are the good ones. I toss a lime in the neck just because.
Oh God.
Just because I like it.
You know what you made me think of that I think we probably should have touched on. So a lot of people throw around, and I hate this. It's marketing language. They throw around this whole detox teas, detox magical berries from the Amazon, detox unicorn horns, whatever the fuck the latest thing is that people are selling for detoxification. I really would like your listeners to understand that detoxification happens in the liver. Just the liver. No magical berries from the rainforest of Brazil are required. What is required is B vitamins and amino acids, which takes me to the whole point we were trying to reach when we were going backwards from the kidneys to the liver to the gut. If you don't have enough amino acids of the right types and the right ratios, and you don't have enough B vitamins, you don't detox the liver. And the liver has 2 stages of detoxification. And the first one is like entering the parking lot of Costco. And it gets turned into a second stage. to go into the second stage of detoxification. And again, if the right substrate's not there, it doesn't happen. And it's like a traffic jam with these cars doing the laps inside the parking lot, and nobody can find a parking spot. There's no parking spots, and the traffic's all jammed up. And those secondary products of detoxification are more toxic than the initial product. So it's really important to have, if you want liver health and being able to store enough glycogen to sleep through the night and train hard and recover from all the stuff that you're doing and manage stress well, you need good liver detox. And good liver detox requires those amino acids and B vitamins in the right amounts available all the time for the liver to do what it needs to do. If you don't have those things, it just doesn't work well, and you're always going to be behind the curve in recovery and probably sleep and a bunch of other areas, because the liver is so critical to health.
Is there any additional things? Is there some vitamin A or vitamin D that's additionally required for the detox of liver?
The main components that people don't get enough of are B vitamins and amino acids, and in the right ratios at the right consistent amount of time. Now, probably most bodybuilders or people that are, focused on their nutrition, they're probably getting enough protein. Whether they're getting the best or optimal ratios is probably arguable. But a lot of people don't get enough B vitamins, especially vegetarians or vegans. They're horrible. They if they don't supplement B vitamins, they really suffer.
Yeah, going through and getting consistent uptake of the right metals, B vitamins, and complete proteins is, without an animal source, is definitely going to be difficult. If we talked about the speed of absorption. If somebody was going through, I guess I'll preface this. A few years back, I wound up going through the whole CrossFit experiment, because I want to see how it worked, and using it as kind of a black box type of protocol to prepare myself for workouts, or as far as like what I could handle. And one of the things that I found was, at the time I was actually using fancy molasses, but I found by going through and front loading about 4 tablespoons of molasses, and then depending on the workout, coming home and going through and basically, I call it re-sugaring or topping up with another 4 tablespoons of molasses. That I would do that, I guess, about a half an hour before, and then I tried to hit within half an hour after I'd finished. But I wound up seeing substantial increases in performance as well as recovery. How could you tie something like that into, or I guess what would the dosage of Amino Pro that I'd want to hit before and after? Like, would I be looking at 6 capsules before, 6 capsules after, combined with the sugar, or would we be looking at something else? Was molasses a good way to do that? Should I have been using honey or just a simple sugar syrup, something like that? What's kind of your thoughts on that?
Let's tackle molasses first. I love the taste of molasses, and
heck yeah.
Molasses is great.
End of questioning. Perfect.
No. The only downside to molasses is the really high iron content, and as we touched on earlier in this discussion, iron overload is a significant issue as you age, and it's what drives that graying, that steel gray color into our hair. So if I was going to use molasses, which I have on occasion, I would take it with a cup of coffee or with milk, because both of those help with chelation, or the blocking of the absorption of iron. So that's really good. I wouldn't take it with orange juice, because orange juice has vitamin C, which increases the absorption of iron. So you want to stay away from that. But other than that, molasses is a great choice. I think that the amount of amino acid is something that's relative to every person kind of differently. It's all comes back to me not being able to define for you, what's the best protein intake for any one person. Like I've used as little as 100 grams of protein a day, all the way up to 350 grams of protein a day. I've used as little as 6 caps of Amino Pro at a time. I've taken 20 caps at a time. I've taken 100 caps a day, 60 caps a day in different dosage, like 10 at a time, 15 at a time, that kind of thing. and experimented with those things for long periods, like 2 months at a time, that kind of thing, just to see if there was any negative side effects with using something like that on myself and on my wife. I've given them to my kids. They love them too. Most of my families use them. We've only ever had 2 people say, one made me sleepy, and another one I didn't like the tingly sensation I got from the beta-alanine. And of course, the more you take, the more beta-alanine you're getting, and you can get more of that tingly effect. But I would suggest to people, and bear in mind, our Health Canada natural products number is based on the consumption of 6 caps in a day. And the reason that number came up is for us to get approval, to get a license, we shortcutted the process because each amino acid, when taken independently, which you would never find in nature, they say, here's the limit. You can't take more of this and get a license from us in your product. So we basically applied in such a way as to not hit that limit on any of the product, on any of the amino acids. And we did the math, and 6 was the maximum you could take. Now, bear in mind, nowhere in nature can you get just one amino acid by itself. So I did not feel like I was taking any risk by taking 10, 15, 20 at a time, or 60 in the day, or 80 or 100 during the day. And I never saw any deleterious effects either. In fact, I found that the load on my gut and any kind of inflammation I had on my gut dropped significantly the higher the dose I was taking. And my recovery was better because the load on my gut, the load on my liver, and the load on my kidneys was lower. So everything seemed to work better. Now, I'm not saying that people should live on AminoPro. That's not what I'm saying, as much as that might be good for the bottom line of my company. I think that there's a sweet spot for everybody, and it takes some playing around, especially if you're not used to using carbohydrates the way you and I have been discussing them here, as a way to limit the waste of protein. You don't need to have as much protein. You don't need to have 250 grams of protein, in my opinion. If your protein quality is good, and you're getting, 2, 3, or 4 to 1 carbohydrate to protein intake, you'll have plenty of energy, and your protein won't get wasted.
So when we're giving that ratio, are we talking grams of protein per grams of carbohydrates, or are we talking calories of protein versus calories from carbs?
I'm talking protein to carbohydrate grams. So I'm experimenting right now with 2 to 1 carb to protein, but I typically run between 3 and 4 to 1.
Okay. For me, I've gone through and used the AminoPro product because I felt like being a child and eating waffles, and I would take 18 caps of AminoPro and then two Eggo waffles with lots of butter and syrup, and I would use that as my sometimes my pre, and then again my post recovery meal from a rather trying workout. And I definitely got some of the beta-alanine tingle a little bit sometimes, but not usually. But I mean, I've taken so much beta-alanine over the years that it takes a little bit to move the needle on me now.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's great stuff.
With diets like carnivore, which my understanding is the same as Atkins or keto, but carnivore just has a little more a little better branding. Diets like carnivore being driven into vogue by Michaela Peterson and others that are kind of in the mainstream, people are getting really good results from that. And they're talking about, I have an autoimmune disease, or I have IBS, or I have Crohn's. How is it that they're getting better results, and why is that happening?
Sure. I mean, that's a wonderful question. In fact, I'll give you my best answer, but I don't think there's a final answer. I just think that long-term it's unsustainable. Here's what's happening in my mind. When you are on a carnivore diet or a keto diet, you are elevating cortisol and adrenaline. And what matters most in this context is cortisol. As we go back to our analogy of trying to hunt for 5 days without food, if you were all inflamed and in pain, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? So cortisol drops your inflammation, adrenaline kills pain, and gives you that superhuman laser-like focus. Studies done with rats on caloric restriction, those guys get super smart in a hurry because they're looking for food, right? So if you're now you're laser-like focus, you've got no pain and you're stronger, and your inflammation is down, and if you apply that to somebody who has autoimmune disease, what's a big component of autoimmune disease is that inflammation. So you put them on a diet that drives elevated cortisol, and of course, plus the adrenaline, plus the sharper mind, of course they're going to feel better by all measures. But I felt fucking great doing keto. The funny thing was, this is a little bit of a funny story. I'll just sidetrack briefly. So when I was dating my wife in Syria, and I was super strict, and I dragged her along for the ride, and then every now and then, once every week or two, we would just stay up playing video games for like 16 hours or 18 hours or whatever, and eat like jelly beans and shit like that, right? And it took about 2 or 3 times, and I realized, man, after I go 16, 18, 20 hours without sleep, get a little bit of sleep, and then get up and train, for the next 3 days, I'm a freaking beast. And it took me a while to figure out that I was putting my glycogen stores back with that as a refeed. So here I am super, super strict at, 13 days out of 2 weeks. And then one night I chow down on all this really simple calories, those just like sugars and stuff like that in this like jelly
easily digestible. Yeah.
Easily digestible. And I'm doing something stressful, which is staying up playing high stress video games for like 18 hours, not getting any sleep.
Yeah, really stressful, bro, playing Call of Duty.
Stressful, okay. Like no,
okay.
Not,
okay.
Well, when you're getting axe murdered by some freaking 14-year-old in another country, it's really frustrating. Every time stressful, like you want to throw the controller
in the video game. We're talking about it in the video game, right?
Listen, I'm not a special forces soldier, anyways. So the point is, you create this environment.
So some 12-year-old talking about your mom's stress.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck your mom, man.
He just killed me in a video game. Came and squatted over my face and said stuff about my mother, and he's 12.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to put that stress in context.
Yeah, it's not like a war zone. It's not a war or anything like that.
This was in Syria before it got unpleasant, so everyone's clear.
Hey, listen, if this was our prime minister talking, he would say it was a war, man. This is just like we're going on a war footing. Fuck that guy.
Oh dear.
Anyway,
dear.
Don't get me started. So the point is, I didn't sleep. I didn't have this great nutritional refeed. I had a bunch of glycogen. I went without a long period without sleep, and I got up and I was able to train like a fucking maniac. So that's my story about why living in carnivore world or keto world or a ultra low carbohydrate diet is probably not a good place to be long term.
So what's the solution?
I can see the benefit to those people with autoimmune disease, but I don't see how that serves them long term, because eventually that train is going to fucking have some wheels fall off, and that's going to be worse than where they were. Although I'm sure Michaela Peterson would say it's pretty hard to get to worse than where she was.
Fair point.
I don't know what the solution is for her.
So when we go through and we look at, because there's a good friend of mine, TJ Kennedy of Kennedy Tactical, as well as Adam DeFreitas, who's a pro MMA fighter, both of which have some kind of I don't say IBS, but they definitely have some issues that seem to get cleared up when they go into kind of a higher meat diet. TJ himself says he feels great when he's on carnivore, and so my kind of immediate, not my reaction, but what I'm seeing happening is there was something in his diet that was causing him a problem. He goes through, cuts everything out but meat. That irritant is no longer there, and so he's going to feel better. And that he has some of those fat soluble minerals that are kind of tiding him over. My concern would be the depletion of kind of calcium and phosphorus, and leading to a lack of bone mineral density over a period of time. That's kind of being missed out. And my suggestion would be to kind of go through and introduce at least pre and post training something like honey or something like that, so that we can get the benefits of the recovery. What's kind of your thoughts on stuff like that, on how it is we can get that person back to something that is sustainable? Because we know that a straight meat base works, and then do we just kind of do a slow addition, like we're doing an allergy test?
Well, if I was him, again, I'm not a doctor. I experiment all the time. My advice would be, if you having positive results, do your switch over to a meat diet, and then pre and post recovery, dose with honey. See how you respond to honey, and see. Let's just see where that takes you first. See if you can do that without losing the benefits of the carnivore diet that he's on. And then the next thing I would look at adding in is a dairy source or various dairy sources. Experiment. You got to stay away from shit that's got carrageenan or xanthan gum. Any of the gums. That shit is fucking carrageenan is cancer causing. The gums, same kind of shit, but they basically irritate the gut. So they're in your yogurt, they're in your cottage cheese, they're in fucking everything. It's brutal. They're there for mouthfeel. So they're
a texture thing. They're a binder.
Yeah, exactly. So you gotta get them out of the diet. They're fucking horrible. So I would suggest that he look at a low carb or a low. He wouldn't have to necessarily go low fat, because he needs to get his calories, and it all depends on how he responds to carbohydrates and which carbohydrates. Like, could he have fruit in his diet, or could he only have certain types of fruit in his diet? Then you get your carbs from there, in which case then you'd want to be lowering the fat in his carnivore diet and just, choosing organ meats and some muscle meats, supplementing with glycine because it's also anti-inflammatory, and getting your calcium up. He's got to get the calcium up. Long-term running a high potassium or a phosphorus diet, is going to be pro-cancer. Going to be anti-cancer, you need something like a 2-to-1 or more calcium to phosphorus ratio. And when you bear in mind that for every gram of calcium or milligram of calcium in milk, it has 0.7 of phosphorus. So it's not like you can just offset all that meat consumption just by adding milk. You would probably have to make eggshell calcium from pickling eggs and then taking the liquid. Probably have to do a bunch of things like that to get your calcium up and make it bioavailable so that you could actually use it. But I would add milk for sure if I could, milk and or cheeses. But if he can get enough carbohydrate in his diet that doesn't losing the benefits of his carnivore diet, which would be interesting to find out, then even if it was honey, or even if it was potato, or even if it was whatever the fuck, fruit would be better because it's high in nutrition and low in calories as well. He could then play with the fat and choose his cuts wiser to have a lower fat diet so that he could, again, it seems like becoming a better fat user can probably cause problems related to cancer. It's not super clear, but it seems like that may be what's going on, because when your cellular respiration is linked to the use of glycogen, it seems very efficient, and it seems to be pro-metabolic. You can understand that if you don't have glycogen and you're living on fats and a limited food supply, a slower metabolism is better for health. Better for survival. So that's where I think the link is to cancer with a high fat diet, is that it actually is slowing metabolism. So I think that's problematic long term. So if he could do that, would probably be good for him to experiment there. But he's going to have to use one thing at a time.
If we're looking at something like eggshell calcium, could you go through and simply take the shells of eggs, dry them in the oven, at 60 degrees Celsius or something like that, and then just put them in a food processor, like a coffee grinder, turn them to dust, and then use a little bit of acetic acid or vinegar, pickle juice, or something like that to kind of dissolve that, and then use that kind of on a steak as some type of a condiment?
If I was going to go through all that effort, I would probably just turn it into. I would just pickle eggs, and take the eggs out, or even eat the eggs and then drink the liquid. That's one way, or do what you did and turn it into a liquid as well, because I just take it as a shot glass and get it down my neck at the same time as I had my meat. But the thing is, he's going to get a huge amount of iron eating like that unless he chooses different meats. And so that's problematic. The phosphorus to calcium ratio is problematic and needs to be addressed. The high fat, did I say that already? I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, there's a high fat issue.
Yeah, the high fat issue, the calcium issue, and the phosphorus issue. Off the top of it.
So if I'm going through, because I like to always try to find the steps that are actionable, you would look at going through and making sure the calcium ratio is dealt with, and that can be dealt with by simply something you make from eggshells and a little bit of pickle juice to just kind of dissolve that. You could go through and, pardon me?
Sorry, bud. I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, that's fine.
If you can't tolerate milk or other dairy, any dairy, like I would experiment with that first. I would try to find. I always prefer Whole Foods as a good starting place, and remember, it's not just. It's complicated. This is like hitting. It's like being on a boat, trying to hit a target on another boat, and being in the bullseye. It's always moving, and you always have to adjust. So, milk, for example, you can be good with a brand of milk during this season, and then going into next season, they change the vitamins they give to the cows, and now you no longer tolerate that brand of milk. And if you don't know that, you just think, well, fuck, I can't drink milk anymore, right? So you have to experiment with different brands of milk. You have to experiment with low fat, high fat, somewhere in the middle, blah, blah, blah. Dose, can I tolerate 1 cup? Like I do, there will be days I'll drink 4 liters of milk. As a general rule, I drink 2 liters a day. So it depends on who you are. You can have Parmesan cheese. If you can tolerate Parmesan cheese, that's great because it's really high in calcium, but it's also really high in fat. And if you want to address the fat issue, then you got to figure out where else you can take the fat out and still get the calcium. But a supplement like eggshell calcium that's bioavailable, not the calcium carbonate, which is useless. You can't absorb shit out of that. But eggshell calcium supplements, if they don't have any garbage in them or you make them yourself, would be a great way to supplement calcium in this diet. Because you
could use like a capsule press and some powdered eggshell.
Sure, you can buy that stuff, powdered eggshell, I believe, or a calcium supplement made from eggshells. You just have to look around. But it's the options there. He definitely needs to address these things, in my mind, for the be able to follow that diet long term. He's going to have to make some modifications for health.
So you definitely want to be looking at the eggshell calcium, and you'd want to be looking at making sure that meat consists of definitely some organ meat at least once a week.
Yeah, think of the Maasai, right? Like again, these are people use the Maasai and Eskimos and weird cases like that, these outliers, and say, well, look how healthy those guys are. Well,
no mismo.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the same, right? First off, they have a certain set of genetics. They've been doing this for a long period of time. Certain set of circumstances they live under. The Maasai drink the fermented blood, the blood and milk of their cows that's been fermented to have a better nutrient profile. And when they eat a cow, they eat the fucking whole thing except for the bones and the hooves. So that should tell you something about the need for glycine and these other things that are found.
It wouldn't surprise me if they were boiling the hooves and using it as some type of.
Yeah, for sure. So by him just eating steaks with some fat in them, that's not going to give him enough nutrition long term. I don't think it's sustainable. And the other thing I would think is if he can find, this may be the thing that fucks it up though, if he can find a carbohydrate that he can get enough of without triggering an autoimmune response. But I think what's covering his autoimmune response may not necessarily be, it may be two-part. It may be that he's getting a food out or foods out that are causing him the stress, and it may be the inflammation. Which came first, I have no idea, because when something disrupts the tight junctions in the stomach and the lining that separates that from your bloodstream, once that starts to get disrupted and they're open too much, which can happen from prolamine proteins found in, like, for example, dwarf wheat, which is the most common form of wheat. What you end up with is now those tight junctions are open, and then not amino acids are getting across, but whole bits of proteins, and then your body creates an autoimmune response to that, or an immune response to that. So you're getting, all of a sudden now you're allergic to chicken, you're allergic to this, and then it starts making other antibodies in relation to other tissues in the body that look like certain things, and next thing you know, your body's attacking itself. So we need to lower what I think may be happening with some of these people that are having such a great responses by having this elevated cortisol and dropping inflammation and bringing their immune system back in line into a normal state. What people don't understand what the immune function is, or immune state, you don't want a high level of immune function running all the time. You want your immune system to be at a low level, and then it ramps up whenever it sees an invader, addresses that, and goes down, and just keeps responding like that as needed. If you run it at high and in the red line, all of a sudden it starts mistaking this guy or that guy, this tissue or that tissue for, oh, that looks like an enemy. Oh, we better attack that. Oh, fuck, that's my liver. You know, that's not a good outcome.
So, or that's essentially a negligent discharge.
Exactly. Yeah, an ND, man. So it's complicated, but by adding carbohydrate, I wouldn't know initially if the carbohydrate is lowering his cortisol, in which case he goes back into inflammation. Is it the carbohydrate that did that, or is it just the fact that the reason why people get sleepy if they've been in a high cortisol state, so they've been in a high cortisol, high adrenaline state, and you feed, and your body takes in that glycogen, or takes in the glucose and creates that glycogen and that energy, what does it do? It drives down the need for cortisol. Cortisol is what comes up in the morning when you're getting ready to wake up. It's just like energy levels come up, cortisol comes up, and you're awake, and you're getting going, and by the end of the day, they're supposed to be coming down. But if you're running at high cortisol states all the time, and all of a sudden you take a big bolus of food, could be turkey, although turkey has that additional tryptophan, which makes it even more, you get that, all of a sudden you feel sleepy. Well, for people that are high cortisol, that all of a sudden feel sleepy, they don't like that feeling. But that's called relaxation for normal people. It's what's supposed to happen. You've been hunting, you take a big feed, now it's time to relax and sleep and recover. But people that run high stress, high all the time, they think of it as a bad thing because they don't have any idea what relaxed state looks like.
There's a book I read years ago by a guy named Ori Hofmeckler called The Warrior's Diet, and he actually piggybacks that and kind of that like gentle grazing throughout the day, a little here, a little there, just to kind of keep yourself satiated, I guess. Kind of some nuts and dry fruit and things like that, and then he kind of suggests using that larger feed at night. And using that to assist with sleep. And I've found that works pretty well for me. Having a little here, a little there, and then having that big meal, because I definitely run a little hot, and I can definitely appreciate the being sleepy and just allow myself to unwind.
I agree 100%.
For me, with kind of my schedule and lifestyle and how I move around, I found that going through and building in that metabolic flexibility, I believe it's Dr. Andy Golopkin is how you say it. He recommends kind of doing it as well with different athletes and kind of going into keto or more fat heavy, going more carb heavy, and I tend to eat a lot more meat and animal protein and stuff like that when I'm here. But I just came back from doing about 3 months in Mexico and late last year, in which I took advantage of being able to eat all the fruit and stuff like that was down there, the different aguas, whether it was agua melon or various different ones, pineapple juice, and just the quality of the fruit is just better than what we have up here. And I found that I've been able to be in a position where I can exist quite comfortably on almost a full meat diet, 70% ish of meat, and then switch over so that I'm on almost a 70% carb diet, and to be able to go back and forth. What are the negative effects of doing that?
I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know that I have a succinct answer. I think there's always going to be an efficiency lag as you transition from one to the other. I think the longer you're in one state versus the other state, the harder the transition is, depending on how abrupt you try to make it. Obviously, one of the things that happened to me when I was transitioning from a keto diet to a carb heavy diet was I really didn't manage, I didn't raise carbs at the same rate as I lowered fat, or I should say I didn't lower fat as fast as I raised carbs. And you can't be on a moderate protein, high fat, high carb diet and expect to maintain your body weight, because you're not going to be great at digesting or at using both of them at the same time, as I said earlier. So I think if you can make the transition less abrupt, it's probably going to be more efficient. Probably like 10% of your calories per week. If you did that transition, it'd probably be better. But I think it's probably easier to transition from fats to carbs than it is from carbs to fats. This is personally totally anecdotal. I don't have a bunch of science to back that, just my personal experience. I find I don't suffer things like brain fog going from a high fat diet to a high carb diet. But if I go from a high carb to a high fat diet, the brain fog is definitely there every time.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So
I really appreciate how gracious you've been with your time, Kevin. And we're definitely going to do this more often, because it's been quite educational for myself, and I hope everyone else enjoys it as well. Is there anything that you'd like to leave people with before we break it off?
No, man. I think it's great that we got a chance to finally catch up and just kind of share one of our bullshit sessions with people. I'm sure there'll be whatever questions come up. It'll be interesting to see what people throw at us. It's great to share. Sharing is a great way to learn and have your ideas tested in the crucible, so to speak, as the Greeks would do. So yeah, I look forward to more of these, man. I always get a lot out of our conversations. It's always a pleasure.
Where is it that people can find you, so they can harass you with DMs and tell you that you're wrong about everything?
Great. I love those. On Instagram, you can find me at Impower, spelled with an I. So I'm Power, IMPOWER _supplements. And Facebook, it's Impower Supplements, no underscore in the middle. And of course,
Facebook sucks, bro.
Yeah, sucks. I don't use it for very much. And of course, my name is Kevin Ramirez. And if you want to take pop shots at me, have at her. I'm easy, man. I'm an easy target. I'm big.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for being on, Kev, and we will have you.
I did forget one.
You
can get us at, you can also check out our website. There's some blog posts there. We don't post a lot, at empower.life. So check us out. Thanks, man.
Thanks a lot, Kev. We're going to be sure to have you back. This has been another episode of Monks and Mavericks. This time we had Kevin Ramirez. Thanks a lot, Kev. We'll talk to you soon.